Hello everyone and welcome to Nikky Lyle Creative Presents with Industry Leaders, where today I'm joined by James Gilmore, who's Creative Director at DesignStudio, who's joined us all the way from Australia. Welcome James. Just a quick intro for anyone that doesn't know. So James has over a decade's worth of experience working with global brands such as the Premier League, Logitech and Rolly. Feel free to tweet or share the event on Instagram so we can spread the word. So yeah, welcome.
Hey Nikki, thanks for having me.
So how did you start out your career as a creative?
That's a good one. I think through the kindness and patience of a lot of other people, probably. Yeah. So I was never really kind of aware of like design or branding when I was growing up. I was interested in a lot of different versions of design. I was really interested in architecture for a bit, and then kind of car design, and then editorial design. And I sort of went through all these phases as a child until I think it was probably in my teens when I started really getting into music, and in particular kind of DJing. And that, as I think with a lot of people my age, led me into like record cover design and like looking on the back of records to see who designed them, which led me to people like Designers Republic and Vaughan Oliver and kind of all of those guys. And after I studied design, I studied at Liverpool John Moores, which is a really great course. It was kind of very artsy and actually not terribly technical, which at the time infuriated me, but on sort of reflection, I think was a really good balance. I was average. Like I was average at university. I graduated with a 2-1. But during that 3 years, I really grew my interest in agencies who were doing the kind of work that I wanted to do and the work that excited me. And there was kind of a couple in particular at that time. So Studio Output, who were doing a lot of work with Ministry of Sound, the club in London, and they did all their flyers every month. And it was just amazing to see how far they could stretch what was essentially an A3 piece of paper creatively and kind of come up with these wild concepts and build really amazing content out of them. And at the same time, there was a record label and a club night, Temper and Forward, who were real pioneers of dubstep and underground music in the UK. And there's an agency called Give Up Art, who is run by a good friend of mine, Stuart Hammersley, and he gave me my first internship. And it was incredible. Like I got to see under the hood of work that I loved and admired, and got to see inside an agency for the first time. And I think that opportunity sort of allowed me to understand that you could work in the space sort of in between culture and commerce, and that kind of really fermented my interest in branding design. And then eventually it all kind of came full circle, because about a year later, I spent about a year doing internships when I came out of university. I should stress that I graduated in 2008, which was literally as the financial crisis was melting down and the world was kind of coming to pieces, which has obviously come back around again. And about a year after kind of interning around various agencies and figuring out what I did want to do and what I didn't want to do, and trying lots of different spaces and different kinds of work and working with lots of different people, I was really lucky and I got a junior design job at Studio Output. Rob, Dan and Ian gave me my first gig, and that kind of really set me up and helped me find my feet and helped me figure out kind of what kind of work I wanted to be doing, but also just like learn all the skills that, like, respectfully, art school doesn't teach you, and you need to figure out on the tools, on a live job with other designers and other people to kind of help you on that journey as well.
Yeah, definitely. Well, that is what being a junior is all about, isn't it? It's about just absorbing and taking on all the advice that you can, and if you're lucky to have the right creative lead or mentors to guide you in the right agencies. Would you say you have a distinct design style at all?
Yeah, I definitely have my own biases, and it's something that I'm conscious of, and I try to work against. I try and work against my preference for my style, because like it's not just me. You know, there's a team of 10 of us here in Sydney. There's kind of 6 other designers, and actually it's about us collectively pushing ourselves in different directions to make sure that the result is distinct and interesting every time, rather than me setting the course with a style. It's about kind of helping them navigate much more complex challenges around client relationships or complexities of the project itself, rather than the sort of stylistic piece. I definitely have a style, and I definitely have a kind of work that I love and I'm drawn to. But I think the more senior you become, unless you are a kind of really named designer and your style is your asset, you have to become much more open and flexible.
Yeah. And do you have any creative heroes that you take design inspiration from?
I mean, I definitely have heroes. It's super cheesy, but my dad is definitely one of my heroes. Like, he's a teacher, and I think the work that he does is like actually valuable to society, whereas I just try and sell more stuff. But in terms of design heroes, I think, for someone, I'm in my mid-30s, I think it's probably a lot of similar people to kind of a lot of other people my age. So like Designers Republic and all those guys, like Matt Pike, Michael C. Place at Build. Intro, it was really interesting hearing Intro mentioned last night on the chat. Like Intro Partnership were a huge influence, and I think a lot of their work that they did with like Primal Scream, again, like really music orientated. My friend Stuart, who I mentioned, Give Up Art, like he's a small independent studio of kind of one person, and he brings in other people every now and again, but the quality and consistency of the output is phenomenal. And then I think there's kind of less heroes, but people that I really look up to because of their sort of diversity of talent and ways of working. I think Pentagram I just find to be a fascinating like operating model. Lots of little studios within one big studio, and kind of all of these leaders in one house of really different disciplines.
Okay, lots of inspiration there, definitely. That's one of the things that's always quite interesting, actually. So how did you first start working at DesignStudio?
Yeah, that's interesting. So I first joined DesignStudio in the summer of 2012. So as I mentioned, I kind of got my first gig at Studio Output, and I'd spent 3 years there working on everything. Like, we were working on this really interesting broad set of clients that were kind of always plugged into culture in very different ways, whether it was kind of hospitality clients or tech and entertainment clients like the BBC and Sony PlayStation and all this stuff. And as a junior in a studio of, I think it was 6 people, I got to do everything, which was incredible. And it allowed me huge amounts of learning and massive opportunity, which I don't think I would have seen in a bigger studio at that point in my career. And I was so at that point, Studio Output had 2 studios in the UK, one in Nottingham, where they were originally founded, and one in London because of the Ministry of Sound and sort of BBC relationships. And I was living in Nottingham, which was like, it's crazy. It's hands down the cheapest place I've ever lived, like wild. And after like 3 years, I was sort of getting a bit kind of itchy for something new. I'd started to figure out this branding thing, and wanted to work on bigger pieces. And personally, I like really developed an interest in motion and 3D work. Like I taught myself Cinema 4D and was kind of doing a lot of the 3D work that we did at Studio Output. And so I just started thinking about like what next, and potentially move to London. And I started looking around. I was like, okay, I want this crossroads of brand and motion. I want to grow my 3D skills. I want to look at my art direction skills. I want to push those forward. I want to work for big clients. And it's really interesting. Like if I kind of reflect on DesignStudio's sort of outward persona, then it was quite mysterious. Like we had this website which barely had any work on. It kind of communicated very little about what they did, and it was because we were doing huge amounts of work for Nokia when Nokia existed, but we couldn't show any of it. We couldn't show any of it publicly because it was all kind of secret, and as with a lot of rostered and retained agencies, your work kind of goes out through various channels and mediums, and it's hard to sometimes claim authorship. So anyway, I was sort of looking around, thinking about that. This was, I think, when I was just getting into using Twitter, and I was following a guy called James Greenfield, who had just come in as the creative director at DesignStudio. He'd been at Man vs. Machine and Airside before that, when they existed. And he put out a tweet and said, hey, we're looking for digital designers, with a couple of years experience to come in and join the team. And I reached back to him and said, hey, I'm not a digital designer, but I'd love to have a chat. And it just sort of went from there. I jumped on a train, went down for a chat with James and a bit of an interview. And I think about 2 weeks later, I was moving to London.
Wow, so it happened that quickly and through Twitter.
Yeah, it was. It's funny. Like I don't use Twitter at all anymore. It's just become this sort of absolute minefield of. It's crazy. But I think it was like at that point when, and it still is, like just reaching out and kind of taking a chance and saying hello to someone and seeing what comes from it. And it was funny again, like listening to Mark last night talk about people knocking on the studio door and just like chancing it. I 100% agree. Like, you don't miss out if you don't try. Like you'll never know. And I think it is really important to like push yourself to make contact with the people that you want to work with and want to work for.
Yeah, that is a really good point. Like every industry leader that I've spoken to in the series has said exactly what Mark said yesterday, which is just reach out to us, and they like it when you do, and they respect it, because it is intimidating just approaching an agency and saying, hey, take a look at what we'll give you time.
And you know what, like behind all the work and the agencies and the reputation, they're just people who like to talk about creative stuff with other people. And you know what, if they reach back and say, hey, let's have a chat, wonderful. If they reach back and are offended and are rude about it, then you know what, you don't want to work for them anyway, because they're probably terrible people.
Yeah, I definitely agree wholeheartedly. So yeah, DesignStudio, as we all know, work with a really impressive mixture of clients. What would you say is the formula behind DesignStudio that makes it create such great work? Is there a bit of magic there, or?
It's interesting. I think great work gets you great work. Like it is like you do something wonderful and people see it and they want to be part of it. And we've been really fortunate, and through our own hard work and through the stars aligning, to work with some incredible clients and work on some amazing projects. One of the things which is kind of core to to us and the way we work, and it's kind of why Ben and Paul, who founded the agency, started it, was a real belief to put designers and creatives in the room with executive decision makers, the people who are making key decisions about the future of organizations and businesses and communities and cultures, and get creatives and designers into that room and into that conversation, which is a lot more common now. But I think 10, 11 years ago when DS was founded, I really don't think it was. And that was, it was often the designers were held behind kind of layers of account management or strategists or PMs, and they would go into the meeting and they would present the work, and then they would filter it back, and it would be this kind of weird barrier between those who had the most responsibility for the decisions around a business and those who had the most responsibility around the decisions of the look and feel and voice and experience of that brand and business. And by shortening that gap and getting those people in the room together, it allows you to ask, frankly, like obvious daft questions, because you need to kind of ask those almost like childlike questions to interrogate a problem. And in my experience, like I think designers are some of the best people to do that, because they want to get to the root of something, they want to get to the heart of it, and then that gives them something to build from. So I think that kind of shortening the gap and kind of really proving the value of design in a business situation has been really powerful for us. That has led us to kind of work with a lot of the high profile clients. I think in terms of a magic formula, we're now 4 studios, and something that we've done over the past couple of years is to try and like codify a way of working and what we kind of build and orbit a brand around, which we call a meaningful difference. It's the kind of thing at the heart of a team, a community, a culture, an organization, which is unique. It's almost like I was listening to a science podcast a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about like dark matter, which is this huge percentage of all of the stuff in the universe, but no one can see it. It's kind of like dark matter. It's everything that is there, but is almost like intangible. And it's through a really agile immersion process, through a really interrogative strategy process, we draw that out and use that as a foundation for building a brand, a product, an experience which is truly differentiated and is truly powerful. And that often means building brands which have to talk to millions, tens of millions, maybe even billions of people, in terms of things like the Premier League. And so it's really about working towards that kind of really powerful, really distinct, but really human core idea, which then sets up a brand and sets up a visual design system that can springboard off of that. So I think, it's a funny one, and it's something I was really aware of kind of opening an office here in Sydney, is how can I both leverage everything that I've done and been part of before, also start to build a new chapter as well, and kind of look forward to what we want to do.
Well, that's one of the things I was going to ask actually, is how do you take the culture from DesignStudio in London and then put that in Sydney and in other offices overseas as well?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's a magic formula. And I think there's like a question at the heart of that, which is, what are you trying to import and export? What are you trying to replicate? What are you trying to flex and change and adapt to local markets and spaces, and give those teams the room to do their version of it? In the case of Sydney, I worked in the London studio for about 4.5 years, from kind of midway up to design director, and for kind of through a lot of the greatest hits, I suppose, as you may call them, or kind of the big hits, the Airbnbs and Deliveroo's and Premier Leagues and Logitechs and like all that stuff, when we were like really ramping up into almost kind of what we are now and growing into what we are now. Like I was there through all of that, and so I was part of that culture. I imbibed a lot of it, and part of my kind of desire, first of all, to open a space here, but also to set up a team here, was to kind of bring some of that to Sydney and bring some of that to this market, because it's not something that I'd experienced elsewhere, and I felt there was like a real gap and a real opportunity. So I think, taking someone from other studios and kind of moving them around is one way to do it. I think building really close ties between the studios is another way to do it. Like, we're constantly all talking to each other, whether it's through things like group Slacks or Zoom meetings, or when we could fly, we would get all 4 teams together kind of once a year for a big Christmas party, which was always pretty wild, as you can imagine. And yeah, I think that, and like, because so there's kind of the things you can do, but then similar to the sort of building a formula around the process, starting to actually like, look at ourselves and say, you know what, we're 11 years old. What are our like values as business? What are the kinds of people that we want to hire? What are the ways in which we want clients, new hires, externals to kind of experience and perceive us, and start to think about how all those pieces contribute to that as well.
Yeah. I mean, I will start asking you more about Australia in a minute, but I want to find out more about what projects are you proud of that you've produced at DesignStudio?
When you sent this over, I was like, oh man, that's a really good question. There's one, it's not like a project per se, it's kind of like before a project. So I'm a really competitive person and I love pitching. I think, like, putting aside all of the kind of moral questions around worth and value and payment and all those pieces, I do think there is something incredibly sharpening and focusing about like a pitch. And so when we pitched on the Premier League, I mean, first of all, when that pitch came in, it was just like, oh my God, like mind blowing. And previous to that, I'd been working a lot on kind of a lot of Nokia work and running a lot of big photo shoots, and whether they were kind of product stuff or going out and doing really nice lifestyle shoots, I'd learned a lot about art direction. I'd also built up a really good book of photographers who I both loved to work with and really respected. And one of those is a really good friend of mine, Kieran Perry, who's a fantastic portrait photographer. And we were having a beer in the Cat and Mutton. Is it the Cat and Mutton on the end of Broadway Market? I forget. We're having a beer on the end of Broadway Market one night, and we were talking about this Premier League pitch coming up, and just like bouncing ideas around and like chatting about what we could do, because we'd always like dreamed of working together on something which would be like really different to all the other work that we'd done, and we'd have like full control and we could drive it forward. And we were like, you know what, like, why don't we just go and get a camera and go down to Hackney Marshes and like chat to people who are playing football on Hackney Marshes and take their portraits and talk to them about what football means to them and like why they play and are they involved in any teams and communities and all this stuff. So me, Stu Watson, who's the CD at the time when I was DD, he now runs Nomad, and Kieran, we introduced Carl, and we went down to Hackney Marshes, and we started just talking to strangers on Hackney Marshes and taking their portraits. And there was like, I remember that there was a guy from Peru and his son, and they played because it was like the time that they could connect and like hang out together, because I don't think they saw much of each other because he worked nights. And there was a guy running drills and like staying insanely fit, just playing on his own, basically kicking the ball at the crossbar and then bouncing it off and running back. And then there was a young group of girls who were playing together as well. And so anyway, we kind of documented all these people. We took their stories, and basically that way of looking away from the professional footballers and looking around the game at the people for whom it meant the most kind of radically shaped the way we approached the pitch and the strategy which we eventually built and the brand that we eventually built, because the whole Premier League brand is built around the strategy of we all make it, the idea that, you know, without the fans around the pitch, there's no game on the pitch. And that approach for the pitch changed the way that we approached the brand. The art direction for the brand became all about all of this photography of fans in stands all around the UK. Like Kieran and I spent 2 weeks going to pretty much every ground and every game in the UK, and it's funny, we'd see like the same fans from like really diehard groups at different games. So there'd be like a group of Palace fans, but then we also like really uncovered like really interesting emotional stories. Like there's a woman at Crystal Palace in South London who goes to the game and goes to the ground every weekend, and she knits hats and scarves in the sort of red and blue of the team shirt, and she sells them outside, but she never goes to the game. She's just a sort of participant in the community around the game. And so that idea of like starting with like a really personal relationship between Kieran and I, and, you know, playing with what we could do together and just trying something because we thought it would be interesting and different. And, you know, that then snowballing into a pitch that won, and then, you know, shaping the strategy and shaping the brand and shaping the art direction and like shaping the whole outlook of thing. I think for me, that was probably the piece that I'm most proud of.
Yeah. And that is a really interesting story. I didn't know the backstory to that actually, and how you came up with that. Do you have any creative mistakes that you've made as well?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, I love it when people ask this question, because for like 30 seconds we all just try and like, no, it's all fine, it all works out in the end. No, of course, like we all make mistakes, we're all human. There is one which was like pretty nuclear, and I've told this one several times. I've told it on stage, so it's fine. When I was a junior designer and when I was working at Studio Output, we had BBC Radio 1 and BBC Radio 1 Extra as like two of our big tentpole clients. And I don't know if they still do it in the UK, but around that time they used to do Radio 1's Big Weekend, like huge festivals that would run in the summer, and like all the Radio 1 pop stars would play and all this stuff. Anyway, I'm like junior designer, 2 and a bit years in, and I get given this job to do like all of the branding, all the merch for BBC Radio 1's One Big Weekend thing. So I'm thrilled. I'm, you know, staying late and being really, you know, studious and kind of putting in all the hours, because I think this is like the best thing ever. Somehow, and, you know, I think through my own fault and through like things getting missed in the studio, I send all this stuff off to print. There's like t-shirts, totes, posters, all this stuff. Couple of days later, I get called up into a meeting with Rob, who is one of the partners and one of the founders, and he tells me that there's a mistake with some of the work that I've done. I'm like, oh my God, you know, what is it? You know, can we sort it out? Basically, it turns out that there's a British girl group, or was a British girl group, called Sugar Babes, who were headlining that year, and it turns out that there's no R in Sugar Babes. It's SUGA.
Oh God.
EES, and I spelled it sugar, like sugar babes. So anyway, somewhere there are something like 10,000 t-shirts in a landfill,
no.
which have the wrong spelling of Sugar Babes on them. But I think like a couple of things like really like came out of that for me. Like, you know, that cost the studio money. Like, we had indemnity insurance against that, which is obviously, you know, part of running a studio. I think that was the first time I'd ever heard of that thing as a junior designer. Like, it really connected and brought home the commercial reality of what you do as a junior designer. Scared the living daylights out of me. You know, there was, like, rightly so, there was discussions about letting me go as a small studio, and it cost them a lot of money. Like, to Rob and Dan and Ian's credit, they didn't. They kind of gave me the benefit of the doubt. But yeah, my career was nearly cut short by the sugar babes. So I don't know how many people can say that.
No, that's one of the most common, like, I love asking this question, but one of the most common things is things like typos, actually. I know of something that happened once with, say, like Design Bridge, where they did a honey project where they had all the labels for like the bees, and this guy had handwritten all the labels and then realised 200 or 300 in, they'd spelled like honeybee or something wrong. So then they print, then do all that, and it's always seems to be typo stuff, and a lot of
I mean, it really sharpened my appreciation for spell check, and I think like that's the other, like we were in a studio with no art workers, no finished artists. Like I then went to a studio which had artwork, and like learning to artwork and like finish art your own stuff is incredibly useful. Like even now when I'm able to kind of walk junior designers through it, but always get your work spell checked.
Yeah, valuable lesson there. So moving on to Australia, what brought you to Australia?
I'd never been. As simple as that. Like I'd done nearly 5 years in London, about sort of 7 or 8 years in the UK in output, and then DS. And I don't know, like I was getting to a point where I could see myself staying in London, and I love London. It's so much fun. But I'd actually been really fortunate during my time at DesignStudio, or to like essentially travel the world. I think I went to most places with several big jobs, and spent like significant amounts of time in San Francisco, especially for Logitech, and a little bit for kind of a piece of work for Airbnb. And that started to really pique my interest in life outside the UK. Like I'd never lived anywhere else. I grew up in the northeast of England, and then lived in Liverpool, then Nottingham, then London, and all of a sudden I had the opportunity to think about something else. And so I started looking into it, and basically the really easy countries to get into are Australia and Canada. And I fancied living somewhere sunny and warm and hot, so I chose Australia. And I'm glad I did, because I love it. But yeah, I'd never been here. I think as well, I'm incredibly lucky in that my profession is very easily transferable, like so transferable that I could pretty much choose to go most places in the world and find work.
Yeah. And what's the work-life balance like in Australia? Because I hear it's quite good.
It's great. I love it. Like I have been surfing twice today. I surfed before work, and then I surfed on my lunch. Like I live at a beach. Yeah, it's interesting. Like I definitely do work too much and too hard sometimes, and I think that's partially the role, and partially my personality. But yeah, the work-life balance is like much healthier than London. You can balance it probably much better outside of London. But it's you can do world-class work and go home to a beach, which I think is always pretty nice.
Yeah, definitely. So how did you set that up, from going from London to then Sydney? Did you just approach them and say, hey, I'd like to set up an office over there, or was it something they were looking to do and you just threw your hat into the ring?
It's a funny story. So I left London, left the agency, moved here, spent a little bit of time working at another agency here, which I don't know. I think I really enjoyed the kind of scale and kind of work we were doing in London, and enjoyed being part of a really big team. And coming to Australia, I think there was a little bit of a shock for me when I went from an agency of sort of 40 people down to an agency of like 7, and kind of working within that team. And that took like a bit of an adjustment for me, and definitely took a bit of time to work that out. But basically what happened was Ben and Paul, 2 founders, were kind of over here at a creative conference called Semi-Permanent, which is, if you've never heard of it, check it out. Like it's phenomenal. It's probably one of the best conferences I've ever been to. Like, I think who did they have last year? They had like Jonathan Zawada, and they've sort of had people like Banksy, Paula Scher. Like it's a really interesting broad spectrum of speakers. And so Ben and Paul were here speaking. They were doing a couple of days talking about like the Premier League and Deliveroo and Airbnb. And obviously we just caught up, and we were having a couple of beers, and they were sort of asking, what's the agency scene like? Do you think, would we do well here? And I was like, oh, hang on, this is an opportunity. And so, it was something which I was, phenomenally interested in. Like, I didn't leave the London studio for any other reason other than I wanted a different life. And so we started talking about it, and we sort of, back and forth on it, and what it would mean and what shape it would be, and the reality, the opportunity. And I think one of the other kind of driving pieces in that at that time is that, London had seen a couple of pieces inbound from Australia, maybe Southeast Asia, that, once you're that far from London, the time difference is just kind of unmanageable. And to be able to service those clients is nearly impossible. Like, it's the end of the day for the client by the time the London team gets up. And, I think had maybe missed out on a couple of pieces because of that. And so we started sort of talking about what it would mean. And that would have been towards the end of 2017. And we spent a couple of months kind of working it all out and doing all the due diligence that you have to do when you open a company in another country. And then eventually we opened doors February the 2nd, 2018. And when I say open doors, I mean I was sat in a WeWork on my own, banging the drum and banging the drum and starting to rev things up.
What advice would you give to any creatives that are looking to relocate overseas from London?
Oh, do it.
Okay, yeah.
Like, do it. You can always go home. Like, you can always go home. It might feel like a long way, but really it's just a flight. It is like one flight and you're home. Like, the fact that you can step on a plane on one side of the world one morning and get off the next morning on the other side of the world still blows my mind. Like, it's wild. I think UK, London, whatever, wherever you are in the world, it's great, but it can be very comfortable. And I think putting yourself in a new place and a new environment and figuring out the lay of the land is a really interesting challenge. And at the same time, like, you and your trade and your skill offers you the opportunity to experience cultures and places and like countries and cities that you may never have the opportunity to do so otherwise. And I think you'd be really foolish not to use that whilst you can.
Yeah, definitely. So what advice would you give to juniors that are entering the industry at the moment? As you said, you graduated after the first recession, and a lot of these talks I've had, grit and resilience has been like the number one thing that's come up, right? Just for the industry as a whole.
Yeah.
What advice would you give, as I said, to juniors now?
What would I say? I think it may feel like the world is ending and you are graduating into the worst time ever, but what you do and your trade and your craft has never been more valued or understood or applied in business ever. Like, you know, I look at the kinds of jobs that you can have as a junior designer now, and it's bananas. Like, you know, when I graduated, it was like, I don't know, it was kind of like half a dozen versions of a designer. You would be like, I want to do branding, or I want to do music design or editorial, or I want to do digital design, or like, you know, you can go and work for fascinating tech companies and startups and small studios, big studios, like cultural organizations, government. Like, the integration of design into society has never been better, and I think that's phenomenal. On the flip side, I get it. You're graduating and you don't have a job at the moment, and that's like tough and scary and hard. Some design agencies won't make it, and some businesses won't make it. A lot will, and new ones will kind of shoot up into the gaps and grow and prosper as well. Like, what you do has incredible value in the world, and I think perseverance is wonderful. I think, you know, diversifying your skill set, but also like building your life experience. Like, if you just graduated and like all of this is giving you anxiety about getting a job, take a bit of time off if you can. Like, if you have the luxury to do that, take it off. Like, you know, read, learn some skills, improve your capabilities. Like, as I spoke about at the beginning, it took me a year to get my first job. Like, I did internships for about a year, and that was kind of a balance of, I couldn't get a job, like I wasn't ready for a job when I graduated, but also, like, I think internships are really valuable. I think they're really valuable for a couple of reasons. Like, they teach you a lot, and you kind of learn a lot of skills that you won't have been taught in art school, and you need to develop before you get a junior design role. But I think you also need to spend time doing things that you don't want to do. And what I mean by that is, like, you need to go and work at a really cool agency that you think you want to work at, but then you actually find out that the kind of work they do most of the time isn't the thing you want to do. You know, you need to do, I went to an agency and did annual reports, which on the surface I knew nothing about. Turns out I hate annual reports and I don't want to do them. You know, I worked at a small agency that did sort of retail fittings and fixtures, and whilst the work looked really cool, the culture was really dull. And I think you need to give yourself that time to like figure it out. Like, don't just pick, you know, the 5 coolest agencies because they're the 5 coolest agencies. Like, really investigate what gets you going and what gets you excited. Because I think if you're excited and you apply for a job and you have a conversation, that excitement comes across, and then someone wants to bring you in because they kind of read that and see that in you.
I think some people work better in different cultures than others, and websites reveal a certain element to an agency, but nothing beats being in there day in, day out, finding out about the culture and experiencing it for yourself, and if it's right for you as well. So what do you look for when you're hiring a creative for your team at DS?
It kind of depends what level. Like, if I'm looking for someone at a more junior level, it's I want to learn something. I want you to teach me something, whether that is through your kind of life experience, or if you're graduating, what you did at college, or where you've been, or who you are, or just what you're interested in. Like, it's more of a energy and like a vibe, and I want someone who's passionate and interested and is going to ask questions, because it's fine that they ask questions because they don't know. Skills and craft can be taught over time. That's fine. An interest in the world and an attitude and like an inquisitive nature, maybe they can be taught. I think they're kind of quite tough to teach and maybe a little bit unteachable. I think as you get more senior, it's capability and flexibility. Like I want to see someone who is up for pushing themselves and challenging themselves and trying to work in new ways and be confident and comfortable collaborating with people within the studio, without the studio. Like language as well, like the ability to write and articulate an idea and get away from the same sort of kind of reference points and wells, and actually unpack the possibility of a piece of work and a brief and an idea and see what it could be. Ultimately, I want someone who I'm going to spend probably 8 or 9 hours a day with, who is good crack, and is going to build a stronger, more interesting, more diverse culture and experience. Because like as designers, we're trying to put ourselves at the sort of crossroads of culture and commerce, and to represent broad culture, we need broad opinion and broad voices within the room, and that diversity breeds strength as well.
Yeah, I agree. So going on to like the pandemic at the moment, which obviously has affected everyone globally, but it doesn't seem to have affected Australia quite in the same way as the UK.
I think we have been fortunate for a number of reasons. Like, as much as I don't kind of ideologically agree with the current government in Australia, they acted quite swiftly to close borders, to institute testing, to kind of mandate that people work from home, stay at home, close public spaces, all of that stuff. Like, it was probably February or March when all that started happening. And as a result, we have only had about, I think, 6,000 cases, and only about 100 people have died. Like, we have not been affected in the same way that, the UK and the US are like the worst affected countries in the world. And it's almost like incomparable when I talk to like my parents and my friends, and I think the difference in situation is like marked, and it's really different.
Yeah. And have you found that it's affected the work within the studio that you've been getting through?
It's interesting. Like, some of our clients, so we're working with a fitness app called Sweat at the moment, who they have seen their business skyrocket, because it's all mobile, like fitness app, workout at home stuff. Other clients that we work with who are based in hospitality have suffered, but have actually, I think we spoke about this, have taken like quite a mature view of, people will go on holiday again, and we can't just sort of panic and shut everything down and cancel all projects and stop everything. We've got to keep moving forward, and we need to be ready for when people do travel again. And I think one of the things as well is, like, from Sydney, we work in kind of all over Southeast Asia, all over Asia as a whole, kind of China, South Korea, Thailand, Cambodia, Singapore a lot. We've only got kind of I'd probably say like a quarter of our clients are actually in Australia. But even then, like, you know, knowing kind of friends and my partner were, I think, you know, jobs are carrying on. I think there was probably a bit of a sort of panic stations at the start, maybe a couple of months ago, where people just sort of stopped because they didn't know what was going to happen. And then I think as this is like extended into, you know, as the sort of phrase goes, the new normal, like, you know, commercial activities have had to continue because, you know, budgets need to be spent, things need to kind of keep moving forward. And so I don't think we haven't seen kind of projects cancel or put on hold. I think, you know, some sort of early stage inbound pieces that were being talked about when it really started to escalate a few months ago went away. But by and large, you know, I think we've been probably quite lucky as well, and have, you know, managed to weather the storm a bit.
And so one question I've asked everyone is, how do you imagine the new normal's going to look after everyone starts to ease more out of lockdown? And also a lot of people have been doing a bit of soul searching, and consumer attitudes, have they changed in this time, etc.? What are your thoughts? It's toughie.
Funny. Like it is tough. Like, I think reflecting on my own personal experience, you know, I've obviously been at home for the past 4 months, which has meant, you know, I get an hour and a bit back every morning and an hour and a bit back every night. It means I can do the things I love before work, and at lunchtime, like surf, like I mentioned, and, you know, go for walks and hang out with my partner. And I think, yeah, I think there's just going to be a lot more flexibility around building a more conscious work-life balance, for one thing, I hope, because, you know, this is essentially a mass experiment, and we've all proven that we can work from anywhere, and that, you know, things don't fall over, and it's fine. So I think that's one thing. I think I like a more kind of industry level for design, I hope that we, you know, think more about our kind of role and responsibility in the world, and, you know, being at that cross section of kind of commerce and creativity, you know, one being incredibly human and emotional and tactile, and the other being, you know, a mechanism of nations and states and business, and understanding like our responsibility a bit more, you know, when we are potentially asked to work for organizations which don't have the environment's best interests at heart, for example, or society's best interests at heart, you know. And I think, knowing what we've all been through, I hope we can start to push ourselves to be a little bit better in that sense. Yeah, I mean, I must say, like, we're starting to head back to work next week. Like, businesses are opening up here, so I am absolutely stoked to see the team. I can't wait at a responsible distance. But you know, I think, like, yeah, I'm really excited to see them, and the challenge of doing, I think, all of our roles virtually, and I think in a kind of management role and a creative management role especially, it's really tricky, because, you know, what would take 2 minutes sat with someone and just have a little chat becomes a call, and then it's like you've got to send feedback and notes over Slack. You're like, oh my god, did I sound like an absolute ass when I sent that message? And yeah, I think, like, just more gratitude for each other and more care for each other, I think, would be really awesome.
Yeah, I agree. It seems to have brought out the best in a lot of people when the pause button's being pressed, when everyone's not overwhelmed by, it was just full on, wasn't it? There's all sorts of things going on all the time with your career, entertainment, living life, the expectations of social media because everyone else was posting how brilliant their lives were, and all of a sudden paused, and we've had a time to really reflect and do a bit of soul searching. But I'm gonna go on to the Q&A now. So let's see what people have
for sure.
And I think we've done quite well considering you're in Australia with the whole connection. There's been lots here and there, but it's not been too bad considering. Okay, so let's see what we've got. So in your experience when working in other countries, is there other design related things you have to consider in regards to trends and culture?
Yeah, I mean, I think less so on the trends piece. You know, we're all plugged into the same internet, and we're all plugged into the same resources, and you know, I think actually, sadly, we're all kind of looking at the same thing a lot of the time, which is a bit boring. In terms of culture, yeah, 100%. And I think it's like, personally, I reflect on this thing a lot, which is, you know, the UK and Northern European design is really affected and kind of has deep roots with like Swiss modernism, for example, and its proximity to Switzerland. And Australia doesn't have that. Like, Australia has a white sort of European culture which is 200 years old. And I think things like geography really affect that, like our proximity to China and Southeast Asia. We have a really rich and diverse Asian community here, which plugs in a lot of different culture that you just don't have in the UK. I also think, like, and I look around at kind of the way in which design manifests here, and I think there's there's some phenomenal designers here, but I do think actually, like, a life spent growing up in a country which is like sunny and you can be outdoors all the time really changes the aesthetic of things, and changes the way you look at stuff. So yeah, I definitely think there's, I don't know if it's like considerations, but there's opportunities to discover something different in another country, which is super interesting.
And I mean, I've got a few questions here focused around design portfolios, and what do you look for in a portfolio when you're hiring? And also the big one is, do you prefer receiving a website or a PDF?
Yeah, I knew this would come up. It's always a good question. I think, okay, I'm going to give a bit of an annoying answer. First of all, I'm going to say I'm not looking for anything in your PDF. I'm looking for something in you. Like, I'm looking for you to show me who you are. Like, I want to see your personality, your interest, your energy. It could be a website, it could be a PDF, it could be a short film, it could be an interpretive dance. I think whatever medium is best served to demonstrate the work that you do. Like, my advice would be, like, what's the work that you do? If you're doing a lot of motion and digital, serve it up in a way that demonstrates that best, whether it's like Google Slides or a .com. If you're doing a lot of print and kind of still stuff, and you want to be able to take someone through on a laptop, do it in a PDF. Like, as an example, you know, our creds that we take out to clients, we have it in several different formats. So we'll have like a keynote, a PDF, obviously we have the website, and it just means you have that flexibility to do it. Yeah.
By the way, I'm just mindful of time, James. Do you have some more time to answer a couple of these questions? Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
Someone's raised their hand. If I could just ask, if you could just ask the question in the Q&A, please, because I've got a few to get through at the moment. That would be great. Thanks. So, This is quite an interesting one. Do you think there's a point where it becomes too late to know what you really want to do? I skipped the internship phase and went straight to jobs, some which I liked, some which I liked less, but ended up doing something I know I don't want to do for much longer, but I'm 34. I work in-house trying to get out applying to agencies or studios, but find a barrier or even stigma because of my 5 years in-house background.
No, I don't think there's a time it's too late at all. Like, I think if anything, you are showing that you are like conscious understanding of what you don't want to do, which I think is an incredibly important thing, to know yourself well enough to know what doesn't kind of set you alight and bring you joy. Like I remember we had an intern in the London studio. Oh man, this would have been like 4 or 5 years ago. Stephen, he was like in his, I think probably early to mid 30s when he came in on an internship. But he was like determined, interested, excited about the opportunity, got stuck into everything. Like, no, like age isn't a barrier. I think, let's have like the honest conversation. Like, design is a bit of an ageist like business. It has preconceptions about what you should be doing at what age and where you should be and what you should achieve. But no, I think if you can find the right agency who do the work that you want to do, and you can kind of demonstrate that passion and energy to chart a path towards something which really excites you, I 100% think you can like change direction. Like, I mean, I'm 34. I think, if we're doing this for another 30 years, at least, although design isn't really an old person's game, it seems, in some sense. But like, yeah, you can 100% like change your direction.
I think one bit of advice I always give, and let me know if you agree with this, James, but there is a formula, right? When you come out of uni, you normally do what you did, which is your internships at some really good agencies. You build up your experience, whether it's in like branding or integrated, etc. And it can be really hard if you've just been working, say, in-house on annual reports. Let's give an example for 6 years. And then you're like, I want to work at DesignStudio. But if you then think, okay, maybe even in this downtime, educate yourself on branding, pick up some self-initiated projects, do some online courses, upskill yourself, throw in like passion, commitment, grit, determination, get that experience, and then try to maneuver your career, you're going to stand way more chance than trying to move over without any of that.
Yeah, and I think, I don't know, it is a really tricky one. I think that like knowing yourself and knowing that you want to, like, it's funny, that question actually made me think about like my journey and like 10 years, and at some point you're like, okay, what next, and like what does that look like? And I think the great thing about the creative industries and also just like the way we work now is that most people will probably see like 2 to 3 careers in their lifetime. Like, my dad was a teacher for 35 to 40 years. The likelihood of me being a designer for 35 to 40 years is probably quite narrow. Like, I may want to go and teach. Like, I do a lot of stuff with universities and D&AD New Blood and all of that work. And we're fortunate that you can spend a significant amount of time doing one thing and then change it all, because that's kind of the way the world is headed as well right now. So like, that wind is at your back in a sense. So yeah, don't try not to get disheartened that you have sort of arrived at a place where you think like you're starting again. Like, all of that experience, good, bad, is something that you're bringing to the table that someone, however many years your junior, is not. I think that's really valuable, and I think, you know, it is kind of what sets you apart and what you can bring and the value you can add, even at that point when you're trying to change course.
Yeah, definitely. How are we doing for time?
I'm fine.
More? Yeah. Okay. Good.
Yeah. It's fine. It's the evening for me, so I'm just sitting
right. Okay. Well,
having a natter.
We'll keep going for a bit then. So would you where's it? Oh yeah. Did you open up conversations with potential studios in Australia before you moved there?
Yeah, I did. And like, you know, partly because it's like terrifying, you know, and I think like I reflect on that point in my life, and I'd spent 7 or 8 years working full time, and all of a sudden I was about to be like out into the job market again. And I think actually because of my own insecurity about that kind of time off, I was like, before I moved out, I started reaching out to loads of agencies, you know, sort of sizing them up for what I wanted to do. Ended up working at an agency called For the People for about 9 months, and like solely because of my conversations with Jason, who's the creative director. Like his energy and his passion like really brought me in, and also it was like a small shop. I wanted to like experience something new. In hindsight, I would have used that opportunity and that time to like freelance and see lots of different agencies and like push myself and like kind of almost like assess myself through that process, you know, outside the comforts of a studio and outside the comforts of like projects that I know, and try and figure myself out a bit more. But yeah, I think on that point in particular, a lot of the agencies here are full of kind of people from all around the world. And, you know, Australia is a relatively small country, and the industry is much smaller. So, you know, if you're kind of reaching out to an agency here or showing interest, like that interest will likely be kind of picked up, because, you know, new talent is always really welcome, which I think is really healthy as well.
Yeah, definitely. So one question here is, I'm a South African graphic designer about to move to London. As someone who's worked in different countries, what do you think is unique to the London design scene, and any advice for those trying to break into it?
I think the thing that is unique about London, and, you know, maybe you see it in kind of Paris and New York, is like design is everywhere. Like it is woven into the fabric of the city. It is, you know, we have legendary designers who have designed the signage system for the tube and the typeface for the tube. And we have museums in kind of that literally are design museums. And we have, you know, nights, well, when people can go out, there's kind of events and nights and social activities. And like, there's a real healthy both competition and community. Like, I think like the design scene in London is fabulous. It energizes you, it tests you, it offers you like so many opportunities, like that it's understood, you know, and I think that is like societally understood. It is understood what the value of it is, and I think that's really wonderful. I think, you know, in my mind, it's probably the sort of design center of the world, or at least the design center of kind of the Western world. Like the opportunities that you'll be afforded working there, like anywhere, will be exponentially larger and more nuanced than kind of most places in the world. In terms of breaking into it, I think it's to that point around like community. There is a community there, and there is, you know, lots of organizations and resources you can tap into to start to kind of have conversations with people, meet people, like unpack and unpick what it takes to kind of join those agencies, through kind of like recruitment resources, or like community resources, like the Design Kids or Glug or D&AD, or like all these things are there for you to leverage and become a part of, and kind of discover more of what London can be. Yeah, man, it's a great place to be a designer. It really is. Like, and it allows you as well to like really sort of burrow into, in a big city and in a big economy like that, you can burrow into like super niche agencies that are doing fantastic work. You don't have to work somewhere which is trying to serve everything. You can go, and if you're like really into art direction and retail stuff, go and talk to Mark at Rosie Lee's, or like the guys at Hotel Creative or something like that. Or, if you want to go and work in like branding or digital or whatever it is, like everything. I think that's just wonderful. Like, it's so exciting.
Yeah, definitely. Very lucky in London with just like the diversity and the breadth of agencies and the disciplines and things like that. Another question about portfolios, okay? So, and this is always an interesting one actually, is how long should a PDF portfolio be, and how many projects?
Good question. I mean, 6 to 8. I think if you like, a couple of reasons, put yourself in the mindset of someone who's receiving a lot of portfolios. You want to be able to get through it. Like, you want to, you want them not to be exhausted by your portfolio. Like, I don't want to see like a 50-page PDF land in my inbox, but on the flip side of that, save yourself something for when you go in for a chat. Like when I was a junior, I'd always have like my send portfolio and then my like chat portfolio that would like either expand on pieces or have stuff in which was maybe like, I don't know, sort of second tier, or stuff that was just like a bit kind of loosey goosey. You need to give yourself something in the tank so that when you sit down for a chat, you're not just rerunning everything that's been seen already.
Yeah, definitely. And next question is, I was wondering what questions you use to break down the meaningful difference for a brand pitch.
Good question. It depends on the client. Like, it totally depends on the client. Like, so the challenge is essentially getting to the core of what a organization and a business does. And so depending on the business, depending on the organization, you approach that in a lot of different ways, whether it's like a hospitality client or a finance client or a sports client. It changes completely and changes radically, both on the type of client at an organizational level and the type of client at like a personal level, because design, as much as it is a craft and a visual and verbal medium, it is also like, it's a relationship. And I really think I'm in like the relationship game, not the design game. And it's, about building relationships with clients and building permission to do work and building relationships with the team and empowering them to do work. And so in that sort of interrogation investigation phase, it's really about like, kind of sussing them out, figuring them out kind of personally, professionally, understanding their ambition, and then using all of that and kind of working towards that piece which is unique and is interesting and is kind of powerful for a brand to build off of. But if you're after a hard answer, I think a couple of pieces which are always good to look at: 5 whys. Like, it's a classic way of interrogating something. Like, constantly ask why when someone gives you an answer. There's a slide that we sometimes throw into decks and kind of turns up in presentations, which is ask the questions of a child but give the answers of an adult. And I think that like that mindset of like naivety and innocence and investigation is really powerful. And there is no shame in being in a room of very well-paid and well-versed people within their field and asking questions about their brand, their product, their service, because you don't understand. Because what you're doing is you're putting yourselves in the shoes and in the mindset of someone external to all of that knowledge, which is generally a consumer, and trying to unpack it down to a level which makes it easily communicatable and easily sort of packageable, and something that you can build a brand off of.
Definitely. And so next question is, thanks for your talk and positivity, really made my day. We've had some real nice messages like that. Do you think our industry has the obligation to make businesses rethink their business models to be more sustainable and socially politically responsible? And do you think that kind of work can be done with a beautiful aesthetic?
Yeah, 100%. Like, as I kind of mentioned, I think we're at this sort of crossroad between commerce and culture, one of them being a human thing and one of them being and you only have to look around the issues which are both becoming present in the world, the crisis through COVID, one of the things which you outside of Australia, you've kind of had sort of one big environmental crisis this year, which is COVID. We had bushfires this year, which were, I think, sort of 3 or 4 months of constant burning. There were days when the air quality in Sydney was 12 times the worst air quality in the world, and it was like horrific, like actually horrific. I can't express how horrible it was. And now we see what is happening with like the Black Lives Movement and civil rights and human rights globally. And I think the businesses cannot sit on the sidelines and they cannot opt out of this. The vocal tide of large amounts of society is moving in the right directions, whether governments and sort of multinational corporations and businesses come with them. I think the ones that do will prevail, probably, and become much more valuable because of it. Like, you look at I think the B Corp initiative is really interesting. You look at people like Patagonia, who have built a multi-billion-dollar business out of being incredibly ethical and purposeful with their cash and their energy. I think it's and like that is really exciting, because then as problem solvers, designers get to unpick like some of the biggest problems.
I love Patagonia. Have you read the book Let My People Go Surfing? It's just incredible.
It's fantastic.
One of my favourite brands by far. And also with Black Lives Matter movement at the moment, the fact that we can donate to prison bail pledges to help out people in the riots as well. So we're so connected at the moment in the world with all different causes. So next question is, are you interested in VR? How important do you think VR will be in the future of design?
That's funny. I feel like when it sort of first came around, everyone lost their mind because it was going to be the future of everything. And I think within branding and design, it kind of never really arrived. I still see it as something which is like really interesting, but it's very much in like experience pieces or entertainment. I think actually things like mixed reality an augmented reality, because you can run them from your phone, and billions of people around the world have a smartphone. I think that's actually much more accessible and useful for designers, and through things like Snapchat has a free kind of 3D AR tool that you can download, and you can start like making stuff in it really quickly. And I think Adobe has a really intuitive 3D tool, and they can be then essentially dropped back into your phone. So the barrier to access is much, much lower. Like if I think about like an Oculus Rift or like a Magic Leap, you're looking at like thousands of dollars in setup before you've even got going. And I think until that price barrier comes down, it's just not going to be a viable option for designers to kind of take part in that.
I remember the VR boom, alleged boom, because I work with loads of like visualization studios, and it just never really happened because people felt silly. Just people don't like that suffocating action of putting something on their face, and just the technology was quite weak, wasn't it? And there's just other better things out there for like brand experiences. But so let's think about another one. Goes back to what you said about people moving into a new sector, and how would you be able to convince a potential employer that you can do their kind of work without the examples to show?
That is really tricky. That is tricky, and I think there is, I don't know if I have a good answer for that from the sort of application side. I think, what I would say is, I think agencies and designers and creative directors need to get a lot better at not confirming their sort of bias to see a reflection of what they already do in the work that comes in. Like seeing a folio and knowing that you can do the work that we already do, me then hiring you is actually kind of pointless because I know we can already do that work. Like I need to see people who can do work that I can't do, if that makes sense. Yeah. Like I need to see diversity, and like a lot of that responsibility lies with me. Like it's a tough thing to answer, to kind of give you a like, this is what you should do, because actually what you shouldn't do is try and conform to a studio style for whom you don't already work, or like try and prove that you can replicate the work that they do, because that's actually a bit of a fool's errand, because they can already do that work. What you need to show them is that you can look at the work that they do and the kinds of clients that they work for, and you can see other ways into those problems and kind of other opportunities. That's value. Like that's something they don't have. That's something they'll want to hire. And part of that is showing it through the book that you send or the website that you send, and part of that is like showing that an agency's business and the clients and like their challenges and the opportunities, and you've thought about that. Like demonstrating that in conversation is always really interesting.
Definitely. So I'll just answer a few more and then I'll let you go. Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
Wrap this up. So when going for an interview, do you prefer people to go through their work on a laptop or bring a physical portfolio?
I haven't seen a physical portfolio in a very long time. And I think, for a number of reasons, everyone has laptops, everyone has iPads. It kind of goes back to the sort of question before, which is like, what's the medium? If the medium really is, then if like, okay, for example, if you're an illustrator And a lot of your pieces are kind of hand rendered and they're really large, and the like tactility and the texture of it adds an emotional value. 100% bring in a physical book. If you're a digital designer who's making websites and things that move, show me a website, show me it moving. Like, reflect on what you're showing and what's going to show it best.
One bit of advice I always give is present your work on a laptop. Have it as a PDF, because you don't want to be trying to log into their Wi-Fi. It might not just be that have it ready, either keynote presentation or a PDF portfolio. And if you've got printed pieces, what works really nicely is just a box where they've all been kept safe. And if you bring out printed pieces, make sure that they're in good condition. You don't want things dog-eared or like coffee stains on them, or make sure they're immaculate. Okay, I've had people go for like final stage interviews and then they've brought in some print stuff that's just been quite scruffy, and clients see you as an extension of them. So if you're hiring someone for your team, James, you're going to be thinking, what are they going to be like when they go out to clients? The standard of presentation for when they're representing our studio has got to be spot on. So that's advice I give. Last question is, do you have any clients or designers from India?
We don't here in Sydney. When I was in London, so it's kind of two parts. When we look at the globe, between the 4 studios, we sort of divide it up based on, we have two studios in North America, so they look after North and South America, New York and San Francisco. London generally looks after kind of Europe, and then everything basically pretty much to India, because of kind of time zones and be able to work with clients there. So out of London, we worked with Star TV for a long time. It's a ginormous Indian broadcast. That was a really interesting piece of work, and they're also working with a couple of clients there at the moment. So in Sydney, we don't work with any Indian clients. Within the studios, we do have designers from India. We don't have anyone from India in the studio in Sydney at the moment.
Okay. Well, again, thank you so much for sparing your time with us. And most people stay right until the end, which is always a great sign. So thank you everyone that joined us today. I hope you got a lot out of this talk, and from James's wisdom, and
it's
some really challenging questions there that you answered really well. So thanks again. Take care, James. I'll be in touch soon.
Cheers, guys. Bye. Thank you so much. Bye.